I wanted to speak with you a little bit today about managing stress. And I put stress in quotes because it was sort of interesting as I started to prepare for speaking to you. I wanted to try to explain what stress was. And that's very difficult to do, trying to find an actual definition for what stress really is. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about sort of the different interpretations that I would like to present to you. And we can kind of go from there. So the definitions of stress vary. It seems to have a certain implication. You know, when somebody asks if we have never experienced any stress, we all know what he's talking about, right? But in terms of a formal definition, most psychologists, I asked our health psychologist in integrated medicine, is there a definition that most people accept and use for stress? And she said, no, not really. This is the best one she could come up with, and it is the brain's response to any demand or change, which to me seems a little broad, right? I could be sitting at my desk and I realize all of a sudden I gotta pee, you know? That's a change. I'm not necessarily terribly stressed about it. I can get up and go, take care of things, and come back and be fine. This next portion, though, I think is a pretty important aspect to what we all think of as stress, and that is a reaction to something that is a perceived threat, right? So if I take that same example, that I really had to pee, and all of a sudden I realize there are no restrooms around for miles. It gets to be a bit of a problem in my head. I start working it out. You know, this is getting to be stressful. Or in the case of some of our patients, perhaps, where they might need help getting to the restroom and there's no one around to help them. So that then becomes a stressor for them. There are other definitions. We use the word stress in other contexts. Pressure or tension that is exerted on a material object. There's a beam that's holding up the ceiling and there's tension there. It's considered stress. And I can see how, you know, in our daily lives we feel pressure, we feel tension, kind of in that same way. When you're speaking, you can stress a certain point. You give a particular emphasis or importance to something. And that I thought was kind of interesting because if we think about the work that we do, and you as interpreters especially, I imagine, if you're having to hear a very difficult, very personal story of a patient of yours, it's your responsibility then to find the words to relay that story, and that's impactful, and that's important, and that probably can be a bit stressful in its way as well. The one I think makes the most sense is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. That I think is a pretty decent definition. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about when I'm talking about stress. So our body has a reaction that happens to stress. It really isn't something we have under our control. If we perceive a threat, or if there is this time of stress, there is sort of a cascade. It's a neurological, it starts in the brain with the nerves, and the neurological message to some of our organs then produce hormones that prepare us to react to this danger or this stress. And that bypasses anything. We don't think about doing that. It just is happening to us. Things like increasing our heart rate, increasing our blood pressure, increasing the rate at which we're breathing. And we need all of that if we are, in fact, in front of a danger. We need to be prepared to move, either to fight off whatever it is that is trying to attack us or to escape to someplace safe. We need to move quickly, and we need energy, we need oxygen, we need all that stuff kind of stirred up to get us where we need to be. We increase our muscle tone and sort of the reflexes get a little bit more sharp and edgy, so we quicken our responses, which is good in a dangerous situation as well. We start to sweat, which helps to cool off our muscles. If our muscles are working to fight off something, then the sweat helps to cool them down. We end up having sort of a flush of sugar, blood sugar, and fats in the body that we can use for fuel that will be delivered very efficiently by this high heart rate and this high blood pressure. We need that as well. Our mental focus and our vision both become very, very acute and very astute, and we're really focused on what is happening. The blood flow to our skin decreases, kind of amazing if we are in a dangerous situation and we might be injured. That would stop the blood loss. The digestive processes kind of slow down because we really don't need to be bothered with that at this particular time where we got something a little more important going on. Your immune system kind of jumps into overdrive. In case we are injured, we can begin to heal that wound. And the sensations that we might have of pain decrease. Adrenaline has a lot to do with that. So it's really a very amazing process that goes on that does a lot to protect us. So sometimes stress can be good. Maybe a less severe example, but someone studying for a test or has a project deadline due. I know I myself, if I've got a million, days to work on something, I'm probably not going to work too hard at it for quite some time until I get a little closer and there's a deadline, and then I get kind of amped up and I get it done. So sometimes stress can be good and allows us the ability to run faster and fight harder. It just gives us that power. When we do that, we are expending a tremendous amount of energy to try to either fight or escape. And what happens, we're basically using all of that energy and all that angst that was, physical angst anyway, that's kind of built up in our body as a result of that stress response. And by using that energy, we dampen what could be stressful about the response. That's a stressful state for our body to be in. So if we use the energy, we calm everything back down again. So we basically just use that stress response to get a result. If danger persists or exposure to a threat or a demanding circumstance, if that persists for a long period of time, we end up with this state of agitation and increased physiological function all the time. Chronic high blood pressure, rapid heart rate, irritability, anxiety, depression, those kinds of things, decreased immunity, irritable bowel syndrome, decreased fertility, blood sugar, diabetes can happen as a result of that, and just an increased sensitivity to a threat, perceiving threats where they are not because you're ready for them. And this sort of chronic agitated state sets the stage for diseases. Using physical activity in the presence of stress gives us an outlet. Just gives us the opportunity to use what has been generated in response to the stress. If you look at physical activity just by itself, let's put stress aside for a minute. Physical activity by itself, we know, is going to be able to boost your emotional state. It does help manage depression quite a bit. Anxiety, tension, it decreases our blood pressure, it decreases our blood sugar, improves our digestion and our immune system. So all of those things that were sort of affected negatively by the stress response is affected by exercise. So using exercise uses up that stress response in the first place, so we are decreasing the risk to our health from that. In addition, we're boosting our health just by physical activity alone, okay? If we look at the lack of exercise and sedentary behavior, also separate from the stress response, we know that that by itself, a sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise by itself is a risk factor for quite a few diseases. So if you are stressed and you are in a situation where you have these risk factors sort of developing that could create a chronic illness for you, you are also sedentary, that could create a chronic illness for you. So it's really better if you can stay more active. Let's see. Why aren't we moving? I am going to try again. Let's try this. There we go. So, physical activity. What are we talking about when we talk about physical activity? I tend to like to compare exercise and activity. And I actually like to recommend that we have both. I'll give you a few definitions and then we'll talk a little bit about that. I consider activity anything that isn't sitting down or lying down. You are up and you are moving, you are being active. Exercise, on the other hand, is something that is carried out on purpose with the intent of helping your body, with the intent of increasing your heart rate, increasing your respiratory rate, making your muscles work, contract and relax against resistance and make them stronger. You are intentionally doing that for the better of you. You can be active, very active in your life. I have many patients tell me I really haven't needed to exercise because I work on a farm and I'm very, very active, or I take care of 3 children and I keep my house very neatly and I'm just not sedentary. I do a lot of activity. And that is great. That is very, very good. But much better than being a sedentary person. However, have they really focused on their cardiovascular system and really done enough to boost the health of that system? Have they really focused on strengthening their muscles with those activities? Maybe not. Someone who is exercising regularly, we'll talk about sort of the exercise guidelines that we recommend for people. Someone who is meeting those guidelines very religiously but is sedentary the rest of the time is also not necessarily getting the benefit from the effort that they've been making to try to be healthy. So we need both. We need exercise and we need activity. So these guidelines that I mentioned were established by the American College of Sports Medicine. That's what ACSM stands for. They've done a lot of studying about exercise. How much do we need? What kind? And it's very, very helpful to us to have sort of a set of guidelines that's been backed by lots of science. American Cancer Society has looked at this, a number of different cancer organizations, and said that this is appropriate even for someone going through cancer treatments. This is what we should be recommending to people. So the guidelines are, we need to get a minimum of 150 minutes in a week of moderate aerobic activity, or 75 minutes in a week of more vigorous aerobic activity, and 2 days a week of strengthening every major muscle group, okay? I like to talk to people who are very active. Maybe they're not formally exercising and maybe they feel like there isn't time for that. We can work that out. We can find a way to get some exercise into their day, into their program. We talk about moderate versus vigorous exertion. I like to use a scale. It's called the RPE scale, the rate of perceived exertion. It's a number from 0 to 10 that you assign to how you're feeling and how hard you feel like you're working. So 0 is what it feels like when you're reading a book or you're watching TV. You're not really exerting yourself very much. 10 is what it would feel like if you were in that stress situation and you had to run away. Go as fast as you could, as hard as you could, probably couldn't sustain that for very long. If we talk about moderate aerobic activity, it's right in the middle of that scale, 4, 5, 6. If we're talking about more vigorous, 7, 8, 9 on that scale. So if you are very active, don't necessarily set aside the time for exercise, can you find a way to make your activities at that level? Can you get to a RPE of 4 or 5 or 6? As you're doing those activities, you can call that exercise. That counts towards what we need for our overall health. Okay? It does not have to be done. A lot of information about exercise says, well, you need to dedicate at least half an hour, 45 minutes to get this all in. That's the only way you're going to get the benefit from it. And I think that can be very overwhelming for a lot of people. And it turns out not really to be true. So that's the good news, that this can be done multiple short episodes. It does not have to be done all at the same time. That's helpful for people who have very, very busy lives. It's helpful for our patients who have severe fatigue and can't fathom the idea of getting up for 30 minutes at a time. So it's a very, very nice thing to know about, a nice little tool that I use a lot with our patients. It is true that higher intensity exercise will deliver you more benefit in less time. I would not recommend, if you haven't been exercising regularly, to go out and start being vigorous right away. You do want sort of a moderate level to build your baseline of fitness, and from there start to boost up your intensity. But that's also a nice tool for someone very, very busy. If you don't have the time, you don't need as much time if you can exercise a little more vigorously. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. ACSM also recommends that you limit your sedentary activity. We talked a little bit about that. I think the main big takeaway is that any movement that you do is going to be better than nothing. It really is how our bodies are designed. We are designed to be optimal, normal, healthy when we are active. If we are not active, that's actually not our normal state. And it actually is a state of decline. The more inactive we are, our body is starting to not perform at its best anymore. So the activity is very important, and it doesn't have to be that you have to exercise. I hope you will. I hope you'll think about that and try to find ways that will fit it in, but be active, move. That's the key. This is the rate of perceived exertion chart that I talked about. Just kind of gives you a visual of moderate exertion between that 4 and 6 level, more vigorous 7, 8, 9. So some simple suggestions. How could you go about increasing your activity if you do find yourself at a sedentary job? What can you do about that? How can you find a way to get a little bit more activity in your day? If someone is sitting and watching TV, there are even ways to make that more active, like standing up, you march during the TV commercials, or you walk around your coffee table. There's actually been studies that have asked people to do that, and they end up getting as much exercise as people who are advised to walk 30 minutes a day. They're watching 90 minutes of television, that's about 30 minutes of commercials, and if they're getting up and moving during that time, it works out. When you are sitting, can you just do some movements? And there is, I don't know if we'll have time to do it, but there's in your handout on the last page, there's kind of a little mini circuit exercise that's done sitting. So if you wanted to take a look at that, some ideas about what you can be doing while you're sitting down to keep yourself moving, to keep your muscles contracting and relaxing. You could do some push-ups on the wall. You can park further away from the destination and make yourself walk that distance. Taking the stairs instead of the elevator is kind of a classic one. If you're on an escalator and you're not injured and you're not carrying a super heavy suitcase and there's not people in front of you, why don't you walk? Walk down the staircase. It's there, it's right in front of you. Why are you standing there letting it convey you? Can't, take a step and walk down the escalator. Go for walks after dinner. Consider purchasing home exercise equipment. And I know that people are kind of like, yeah, I did that. And it's drying my clothes now. But research does say that if the equipment is there, you are more likely to use it than if it's not there. So think about that. There are pieces of equipment you can get now that will convert your desk to more of a standing environment. You could even move. There are treadmills, just the conveyor belt part of it that you put on the floor and you just walk. You put it at a very, very, very slow speed. You can still read, you can still do all your work, but you're walking the whole time. One of our directors has a little like recumbent bike that he sits on when he works. I've seen someone with it's like a little stepper. It's just two stairs, just on the ground, and it's just steps all day. If you need to communicate with someone, it's very easy to pick up the phone or send an email. How about walking down the hall and talking to them? Okay, just little things that you can do to increase some activity. So I thought what I might do is talk you through just a little quick kind of mini circuit. If you're interested in getting up and stretching a little bit, we can kind of go through this one. All right, so the first one is called sidestepping. Basically, you just want to bend your knees a little bit, and you're just going to step to the side and then back again. Okay. Number 2, you may need to hold on to the person next to you or your desk or something. Raise up on your toes and back down. Okay. Next one, I'm going to go with the high knee marching. You could jog in place. I put there the wall push-ups. It's kind of not going to work in this environment, but you can imagine. Jumping jacks, or there's a low impact version, which is just sort of a step to the side with your arms this way. You can do a regular jumping jack if you want, and then a sit to stand. So with your chair, what I would have you do is sit down and stand back up. If you can, ideally I would have you not actually sit all the way. Touch your bum to the seat and come back up. And then just touch it and come back up. So that's all this is the seated circuit that I have there. If you are interested in that when you're at work, you got that option as well. All right?
Thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome.